Hola a todos, bienvenidos. Vamos a dar comienzo a este Wealth Talk, una conferencia exclusiva para clientes de Santander Private Banking y que se enmarca dentro de un ciclo de conferencias digitales que tenemos previstas para los próximos meses. Antes de comenzar, les doy un par de indicaciones. Para aquellos que prefieran seguir la conferencia en inglés, se puede hacer pulsando el pequeño botón rojo que indica EN situado en la parte superior derecha de la pantalla. For those of you preferring to follow the conference in English, please press the red button indicating EN at the right upper side of your screen. Y si alguien quiere hacer una pregunta a nuestro invitado de hoy, es muy sencillo. Basta con utilizar la opción de pregunta-comentario que está situada en la parte superior de la pantalla en el centro. Al final de su intervención, en función del tiempo restante, responderá a las preguntas.
Green. And then at the end of the presentation, we'll have some time for the Q&A. Víctor Matarranz will be introducing our guest.
He's Director General of Wealth Management and Insurance. That's the division that integrates the private banking business in all the countries that the group is in. Victor, go ahead. Yes, hello, good afternoon, everyone who's watching from Europe, and good morning, everyone who's watching from America. Thank you very much, Christina. Today, we are launching this series of talks, which we've entitled Wealth Talks, and with all of this coronavirus crisis, there have been some good things, and that is that we thought that we could organize this type of event and this type of sessions with all of our clients, and to see actually more clients than we would have been able to see face to face. And so we've decided to take advantage of that opportunity, and we're going to hold these conferences about science, about geopolitics, about society today. And today we're starting with an expert in training, in sports training, in fact, because he is someone who has spent most of his life coaching a star athlete. And we've done this because in these days when everyone's felt fear and uncertainty and so much worry, I think he can tell us about how to manage adversity and how some of the values that he's going to talk about can help us to do that, and how we can turn adversity into an opportunity. And so, welcome, Toni Nadal. How are you? Yes, hello. I'm fine. Well, I'm saying I'm fine because I got used to always answering that. I remember when journalists, when Rafael had a problem, used to ask me, and how is he? And I would always say, oh, he's fine, he's fine. He's fine. And they would just look at me, and then I would add, well, if he wasn't doing fine, I wouldn't tell you either. So I'm always just going to say he's fine. Okay, well, Toni Nadal, of course, needs no introduction. I think you all know who he is. And we all remember that picture of Toni concentrating while his nephew played on the court. But let me just sum up his career. He was Rafa's trainer until 2017, has published a book entitled Nadal Serves, Socrates Answers, about his philosophy in sport. And currently he combines his work as a coach with talks and conferences on managing adversity, overcoming obstacles, and values. And in that, he works with a foundation entitled What Really Matters, which works with young people to convey the values of humility, perseverance, discipline. And in some of those sessions with that foundation, in my kid's school, I've actually watched him. He doesn't know that, but I've watched him, and it's amazing what an impact he can have on young kids. And he's known as a very demanding coach and loyal to values that he says help in sport, but also in life. Values that we can see very clearly in Rafael Nadal, that have turned him into a world champion. And Toni always says that it's hard to build character. And so the basic question, and what we would like him to share today, is how does one prepare for all this? How do we react to these kinds of circumstances? How to make the best out of these times? And so I'm just going to leave it there. Toni, I leave you to it. As Christina said, people have been sending in questions, and I will read them out at the end. But basically, we're in your hands for you to help us with all of these issues. Thank you very much. Okay, well, first I have to say that I never want to convince anyone about how to prepare for adversity or anything in life. what I do is just talk about how I believe I prepare for life and for tennis. I trained my nephew when he first started, and always dreaming and thinking that my nephew could one day become a lead player. How does one train in order to become one of the top players? Well, obviously, it's not just one path you can follow, but not all paths will lead to where you want to go. Not all paths lead to Rome, and so you always have to pick a path, pick a road that is going to be feasible. And I personally tried to take the road that I felt was going to be the easiest in order to reach the goals that we had set. Ultimately, I always felt that in order to get to the top, in order to reach your fullest potential, the road is never going to be easy. Being better than the rest is always going to be difficult, I felt. And so what was my first idea? To prepare my nephew to face difficulties. And how do you prepare for that? Well, I think that you can prepare for that with facts. And Goethe, one of the greatest philosophers in German history, said that talent is built in bed and character is built in the storm. And I think that is absolutely true. It's really difficult to build a strong character just with words, particularly with nice words. And so my intention when I was training Rafael was always to help him build a strong character, because I knew the road was going to be hard. I knew it was going to be hard to play against the best tennis players in the world. And so that was really my first goal, to build up his character. And now we're facing really hard times. It's been really hard. I was asked during these past months, I was asked about confinement and lockdown, and I always said, I'm not really worried about lockdown, because that is a finite amount of time which you can get through, for better or worse. And if I have to spend 2 months locked down, that's what I will do. The problem is what comes next. And here, in the world of tennis, it's the same thing. The problem is always about what's to come next. And that was always my focus, to always be ready for what came next, to equip my nephew for the future. And I think what I always used were some very simple concepts. I always try to apply common sense and logic and not overcomplicate things. I think today we live in a world in which we try and have an explanation for everything. We try and make sense out of everything. And sometimes I think we overcomplicate things. I used rather simple concepts. And these concepts, for example, nowadays, because we live in such a complex world with so much technology, and we see such a divide and so much political correctness, and then people forget about what truly matters. And for me, what truly mattered was, well, I used to tell Rafa, okay, 3 basic facts, Rafa. Hit the ball as hard as you can, if possible. Throw it as far away from your opponent as possible, and if possible, keep it inside the court. And then everything will go fine. And that's how we approached it. We didn't overcomplicate things. I used to say something to him that I think was pretty crucial too, and that was Rafael. Every time you hit the ball, do it the best you can. And really that's the whole point, to do things as best you can, always. And that's basically it. And that's what I did. And of course you said that I've been known as a very demanding coach, and that's true. Perhaps I was too tough and too demanding sometimes, because I just cannot imagine another way of doing things. What is the point of getting a ball over a net if it's not about always taking it to the limit and being your very best? That's just how I see life, but it doesn't mean that you should just be demanding of others. You should also be very demanding of yourself. And I tried to make sure that my nephew, who was under this pressure, felt that he was also responsible for that pressure, because really you have to own your own life. And you've asked me to speak about how to face or how to deal with adversity, and when I thought that Rafa could become a great player, well, what I did was to look at his characteristics, both mental and physical, and then came up with a strategy, a training protocol, so that in the future he would be able to play in a way that would best suit his qualities. And I tried not to deceive myself, because I think the problem, or one of the problems nowadays, is that we live in a world in which we do all tend to deceive ourselves a bit. And we always tend to believe that we're better than we really are. And that's where the problems start, with frustration. Because if you think life is supposed to be easier, or that everything should come easier to you because of who you are, that leads to frustration. I never expected life to be easy, and so I felt that whatever I achieved was what was to be expected, given that I expected things to be difficult. But first and foremost, you have to be realistic. And in these tough times that we're all going to have to live through, and it's not just about lockdown, but again about the recovery, which we're going to have to go through, and which I'm sure is going to be difficult, we have to know that times are going to be hard, that it's not going to be easy. And just like I said to Rafael, you can't expect to play Wimbledon by playing your friend from the nearest village. When Rafa used to say, oh, this is a really tough rival, I said, well, what did you expect? To play your little friend from next door? Well, that's just not possible. You're going to have to play, or you're going to have to beat somebody who is really, really difficult. So you know that. And I just accept it. And I've always tried my whole life to accept whatever was happening. I trained my nephew to try and beat Federer, to try and win Roland Garros, to try, when we managed to win Roland Garros the first time, or the second time, or the third, we realized that that was not enough to be number one in the world. And so then we had no choice but to improve further so that we could win Wimbledon or the US Open or Australia. And when we achieved that, we felt that that was not enough either. That it wasn't enough to beat Federer, because Djokovic turned up and made things even harder. And so we just had to deal with it. We had to find a way. And that's really been how we have continued to move forward. And you really can't do it any other way. That's what life is about facing difficult situations. And I can share something that happened to me many years ago with Rafa in the Australian Open in 2009. We had to play the final, and Rafa had played a very tough semi-final against Fernando Verdasco, 5 hours, 14 minutes. After that game, he was really exhausted. He was super tired. And the day of the final, we went to train for the final. It was about 3 hours before the game began. And Rafa was having trouble, well, all over his body. His shoulder hurt, his hamstrings were tight, his arm hurt, he had a headache, and he looked really tired. And that always worries me when he looks so tired, because that means a lack of gratitude to life. Because you really have to make the best of things and be happy with what you're experiencing. And so I approached Rafa and said, well, Rafa, do you have a problem? And he said, I have so many that I'd rather not start listing them. And I said, well, in that case, you have two choices. We could just leave, if you like, and just quit. Or, if not, make an effort and change the look on your face, because if you look like that, you're never going to win this match. And he said to me, oh, right, very easy for you to say, which is something he says to me quite often. And I replied, as I always do, well, I know that if it was easy, I would have done it. I know it's hard. The only thing I can say to you is that with this attitude, you will not win today's game. And he said, well, I can't run today. And I said, what do you mean you can't run? Everybody can push themselves just that little bit further. And he said, no, I really can't. Not today, I can't. And I said, okay, well, do what you like. You're deceiving yourself. You're deceiving me. Do what you like. And he said, no, really, I can't run today. And I said, well, look, you're really poorly. 3 hours from now, I like to motivate people. I said, 3 hours from now, don't worry, you're not going to feel any better. You might even feel worse, I said. Don't worry, your mom and your dad or God will not be coming down to help you. You are the only one who can tell whether this tournament means enough to you or not. You do whatever you like. It's your choice. And he said to me one more time that he really couldn't. And I said, well, I would just like to have a sniper out there amongst the audience. And I could tell him, when Nadal stops running, you shoot him. Because I'm sure then you would not stop running until you made it back to Majorca. Because he does love life quite a bit. So really, that's just the way it is. I kept talking for 2 hours. I don't think I've ever talked for longer before a match. And when there were like 15 minutes left, I realized that things were changing and that he was looking better. His face suddenly changed. And from that point, I changed my spiel and I started with the yes, we can, the famous Obama phrase, who had recently won the elections. And then half jokingly, I started talking to him. And so what happened was, in the end, so 3 hours before we started the game, he said he couldn't move. And then 4.5 hours after the game had started, he was on set number 5 and he was able to beat Roger Federer in a great, great match. So that's what I've seen so many times. When you picture what's going to happen, you always picture the worst. But when you're actually doing things are never as hard as you thought. You just have to have the will. You're asking me how to get through the current crisis and current adversity. Well, I don't know what the answer is, but I can tell you what I used to say to a kid whom I coached many years ago before I coached Rafa. I said to him, if you do everything I tell you, you might not be, well, most certainly you will never become a great player. But if you don't do what I tell you, you will definitely never be. And so that's the same thing I could tell people nowadays in this very difficult circumstances. If we do everything that's required of us, we might overcome this crisis sooner. But if we don't do it, I am certain that it will take longer and it will be that much worse. And therefore, in life, you just have to get on with it and always do the best you can and what's required of you. And I personally have always tried to get Rafa to accept reality and accept problems. I don't like to flatter people, because the people who need flattery are just not strong enough to hear bad news. We all like to hear that we are great at everything, that we're really good. But I think that if you want to face reality, you have to be aware of the facts. And many years ago, we were in Monte Carlo, and we had to play the Monte Carlo Open final against a player who was rather good, pretty good, a Swiss guy called Federer. And we had to play that final. And by the way, Federer, at his age, should really be thinking about retiring and spending more time with his family, and let younger players like Rafael move on. I'm going to try and sell him a pension fund. Yeah, go ahead. You go and talk to him. And maybe we could go together. Yeah, definitely. And so that day we were supposed to play Federer, and I remember that Rafa, it was maybe an hour and a half before the start of the match, and Rafa said, "Toni, how does it look today?" And I said, "Well, I think it's going to be hard. I think it's going to be difficult. Federer has a better drive than you do. His backhand is better than yours. His volleys are a lot better than yours. And when I was going to say, and his serve is so much better, he told me, please stop. Don't knock me down before I go out to play." And I said, "Well, I could lie to you if you like. That's no problem. But an hour and a half from now, that Swiss guy is not going to lie to you, so you better be aware of what you're going to be facing and then look for solutions." Why did I say that to him? Because I was confident. And we had a very straight relationship with him. And that's what we all need to do, to feel that if we make the effort, things will go well. We need to believe that. And so I told Rafael that, because I felt that that was the best way to manage that situation. And obviously, I didn't just leave it at telling him how wonderful Federer was at everything. I remember I said to him, "Yes, Federer does do all those things better than you, but at the same time, I'm sure that if you do the right thing, you can beat him. So what does that mean?" It's very simple, I said. Play each point as if it were the last, as if it were the match ball. Play each point as if your life was at stake. And just play harder than he does. And that's basically all it takes in life too. It's always the same. Just work a little harder than the rest. And then you'll have a better chance of success. And Rafa was actually able to win that match. Obviously, there were some tactical recommendations. I said, do hands every time, and maybe you can bore him into making a mistake. And I always do the same thing. I never expected life to be easy. Never. And because I never expected life to be easy, I always accepted the problems we had to face. And we had a big problem with Federer and another big problem with Djokovic. But the biggest problem for Rafa were his injuries. He had some complications at times for different reasons. And I remember that in 2005, a specialist, a doctor, who was treating him for one of his injuries, the foot, told us that his career was basically over with that kind of injury on his hip, and he really couldn't finish a lot of the training sessions, but he never complained. I don't like complaining because generally I feel that people who complain, I've seen this over and over, people who complain tend to be people who are less willing to do what it takes to change their situation. And I remember that in 2013, for example, Rafael had to play. Well, he didn't have to play. We had an injury in the last months of 2012, and Rafa had been postponing his return because he didn't feel strong enough. His knee hurt, and when we were supposed to return, Rafa would say, no, I'm not ready yet. We were supposed to play in London, the Masters, and Rafa said, no, I can't play. And then we were supposed to play an exhibition game at the beginning of the year, and Rafa said, no. And then we were supposed to go to Doha for a tournament, and Rafa said, no, I don't feel well enough. And finally, he was supposed to play in Australia, and he also said he couldn't play. And at one point, I just said to Carlos Costa, well, sign him up for Viña del Mar, and let's hope for the best. But don't tell Rafa. Just sign the contract, and then we'll go and play. And then we'll see what happens. And so we went, and Rafa lost the final. He didn't play very well. He was very far from his peak form, but at least it was a start. And then we went to Rio, and, well, things did get a bit better. He won that tournament, really, mostly because his opponents were not that great. But anyway, it did get things moving, and then he went to Acapulco, and he played very well. And in 2013, he just couldn't crouch. He had to keep his legs straight. He couldn't flex them. And playing tennis without bending your knees is really difficult. If you don't use your knees and your legs, it's really hard to play. But that year, I remember that I told Rafa, every time the ball comes to you, just hit it as hard as you can and try and make it a win shot so that you don't have to run after the ball more than necessary. And that year, he ended the year as number one in the world and won Roland Garros and the US Open. And we, at the beginning of that year, hadn't even been sure that he was going to be able to play. But once you get on with it, if you're willing, and Rafa has a wonderful disposition, if you really get on with it, ultimately you get there. Or at least, well, of course, that doesn't mean you're going to win, but at least it does mean that you're going to feel that personal satisfaction of knowing that you gave your utmost. And then if things go well or if things go badly, that's such a different thing. And that's really been the approach. Every year that I coached Rafa, I always felt, again, that there would be difficulties and that we would just have to face them. And when things went very well, I would say to Rafa, let's work harder to see whether we can lengthen this party a bit. And when things went badly, I used to say to him, let's work a little harder and see if we can get out of this slump as quickly as possible. And that's really what I think you need to try and do always in life, because you have to face facts and just get on with it and do your utmost. And then if things don't go as you wanted, at least you will know that it wasn't because you didn't try. And so that is, if you do that every day, will eventually lead you to the opportunity of giving your very best once you get used to that.
Sure.
So in my life, I tend not to trust people a lot. You have to trust yourself, rely on yourself. You have to be 100% responsible for what you do and what you achieve. So at least let's try and let's fight until the end, because there is no other option. You have to fight hard to come out of this crisis, all of us together. Thank you very much. It was very motivating, and I have a question for you. We've received quite a few questions for you, but I have one question myself. Given your approach to coaching, to training, and with Rafael and perhaps with some other coachee, weren't they afraid to face up to Toni Nadal? Because you're very demanding, you're a very straightforward person with very clear values and principles. Aren't you a bit intimidating? Especially when they feel bad? Not really, because I was very demanding with Rafael. After all, he's my nephew, but I was not so demanding with my other coaches. I'm very demanding with my own family, but I'm as demanding as I think I can be. I just don't believe in being harsh for the sake of it. It's not an end in itself. It's a means to an end. And in life, it's much better to be demanding. We have many kids here who come to train in our academy, and their parents pay a lot of money because they want their children to be the best they can. So the least we can do is to be demanding, actually. Otherwise, we would be cheating them. So that's the way I approach life. Of course, you are demanding, but at the same time, you are loving. Being demanding without being loving makes no sense. It makes no sense for a boss not to show any empathy. A true leader, it's not just what he or she says, it's when and how they say it. And you'll never be able to be a good leader if you're not a good person, because at the end of the day, you need to feel sympathy. You need to be fond of the people you work with. And that's what I've always done. I like all the kids I've coached. Of course, my end game was never to win Wimbledon or Roland Garros. My goal has always been to improve day after day. And improving is a daily challenge, a daily activity. You have to improve a bit every day. At least that's how I see it. And if you do that, you'll feel much more satisfied once you know you've done your utmost as best you could. Some greetings for you from Mexico. By the way, we have more than 1,800 people connected, listening to you. You should know that. Now we have more than 2,000 people. A very good start for this cycle of conferences. Someone from Mexico sends greetings and has a question for you. How do you go about, what do you need to do to maintain, to keep that motivation once you become number one? How did you coach Rafa to keep him motivated and to keep him running and training after being or becoming number one? So how do you motivate someone who's won everything? That's a question I've been asked many times, and I have always gave the same answer. He hasn't won everyone, and he hasn't won any future tournaments either. So you need to keep on working very hard, because it's impossible to win everything. And someone as my nephew who's been very fortunate, of course, he's worked very hard, but he's been lucky, fortunate. So the least he can do is to remain motivated, to remain engaged with what he does. If you're not motivated with that, that would mean that you're not grateful. I mean, there are lots of people in life who have lots of troubles and problems, who are not doing well. So we should be able to step in their shoes, to have some empathy when we've been more or less fortunate in life. I mean, my nephew did very well in life, so it is his duty, in my opinion. I mean, he needs to be grateful, and that entails remaining motivated. And what's more, you need to be someone committed. I mean, you need to show some commitment with what you do. I mean, you may decide to step down and to retire, but as long as you're there, you need to remain committed with everyone, sponsors, tournaments, Banco Santander, in the case of Rafael, or any other sponsor. So what you must do, what you need to do, is to do your best. And I used to tell this to Rafael, especially when occasionally he had some ups and downs, when he had perhaps too many injuries. And I always said to Rafael, life has treated us much better than we deserved, much better than we expected. The least we can do is to work very hard and to be positive, to remain positive. Because I understand that being committed with what you do is essential. Imagine, I don't like flying. I hate flying. Had I not had any commitment, I would have been very unhappy, right? Look at this current crisis, the coronavirus. Spanish health professionals lacked resources and safety equipment. Even with very scarce resources, they've shown a huge commitment to save people's lives. Just imagine what would have happened had they not been committed. Instead of having had 40,000 deaths, we would have had many more. So it's the least each and every one of us can do, to commit, to try and do things as best as we can. Well, that's very clear. Thank you very much for your answer. And we have the same question in 3 different wordings. I'm in full agreement with your philosophy, which is based on being demanding and becoming better and better. But what about Rafa's Rafa's talent? What percentage of his success is due to you and to himself? Would he do you think he would have been as successful with a different coach? I mean, 95% is me and 5% is Rafa. No, I'm just joking. I mean, Rafa's success is all him, of course. What I always did, I did the easy things. I gave him advice. I told him what I thought he needed to do, but of course, execution is much more difficult. And as to the second part of your question, well, without me, he would have played football and not tennis, because he really liked football much more than tennis. Although he doesn't know a lot about a team that dresses in a white shirt. And, it's all his success. It's 100% Rafa. Rafa has a great virtue. He's always been a good listener. He can listen. He's obedient. He follows other people's guidance. Being obedient and following the right kind of guidance is a sign of intelligence. I hear many parents saying that my child has a strong character because he knows how to make his own decisions. Well, that should be a source of concern. because an intelligent person knows that they need to listen to others, that they have to follow other people's guidance, provided it's the right guidance. And this is what Rafael did. He followed that guidance. It was mine, it happened to be mine, but I'm sure that had he had another coach, he would have followed his guidance, and perhaps he would have been much more successful. I don't know. But he did well, following my advice. But I'm sure that had he followed another coach advice, he would have been also extremely successful. 2 of my children play tennis, and I always ask them not to share the fact that I'm their coach, because that shows very clearly that it's all Rafael's merit and not mine. Another question. When you play tennis, your mind or your body, when do they come? I mean, what's the first to tire, your mind or your body? Both. I mean, what's most important is to be motivated. A motivated player can get very, very far. I mean, just you should find a motivation in life that can take you so far, much further than you might expect. If you find your own goal, your own motivation, you'll be able to do things much better and you'll be reaching much further. It is essential to be motivated in life, and that's up to your head. Of course, you need to be properly trained. Even if you're not fit, motivation is not so useful, but it's usually your head. When Rafael was very young, I remember the physical trainer in his group. We were discussing another kid, and he told me, this kid is not fit. And I said, far from it. I mean, it's not his fitness, it's his head, his motivation, his suffers, his pain level, his threshold is way too low. As soon as he becomes a bit tired, he just gives up. That's the reality. But Rafael has won many matches when he was extremely tired, exhausted, and that's your mind, not your body. Some years ago, I was with Rafael, and I didn't like he was playing the preliminary matches because I had been following him on TV, and he replied that his coach had praised his attitude. And I said, you have no attitude whatsoever. You're just a great runner. Having the right attitude is a totally different thing. Is trying to find solutions all the time. I mean, being a good runner is not as valuable. I mean, it's just having the right mind to find the right solution. And that's usually the weakness that I have identified in today's youth. I mean, they're used to get what they want right away, so they frustrate very easily. It's very clear in younger generations. And my own children are like that. I agree with you. And I try to motivate them and to guide them every day. My children, I'm referring to my children. I look at them in the rearview mirror and they pay no attention to what I'm telling you. I'm telling them. Well, 2,000 people are now listening to what you're saying, and I'm sure they're following your advice. They'll be following your advice. They're sending you greetings from Tucumán, Argentina, Mexico, Galicia, and many other places. There's another question here that I like a lot. It's in English. It says, Rafa's routines on the court, bouncing the ball, adjusting his shirt, fidgeting with his equipment. My mother hates it, but I've always thought that this is very important for him and helps him concentrate. Is this right? Am I right? No, I don't think you're right. I don't really know, actually. I found it very annoying, too. I am not a superstitious person at all, but I remember some years ago, Rafael, we were in a tournament. I can't really remember where. Queens, I think it was. And he had gone to the movies to watch that Jack Nicholson's movie.
El que iba saltando las baldosas y demás.
Y Rafael me dice,
That guy with OCD. And he said to me, I watched a wonderful movie last night. What an obsessive guy. I mean, what a huge case of OCD. Well, just like you, I replied, I have no OCD whatsoever. What do you mean? It was as good as it gets, the film, the movie. And I said to him, you're the same. I mean, you should watch yourself in the court. I mean, you're fidgeting, you're bouncing the ball, you're always moving. What do you want me to do? He replied. Do you want me to stop doing that? I won't be doing that any longer. But the next tournament was Wimbledon, and I said, let's wait. You can keep on doing that in Wimbledon in case something bad happens. When he was young, he didn't do that. He didn't used to do that. He kept on adding more and more routines before hitting the ball. I mean, not doing that, it doesn't mean that he was not concentrating, but in life, if you create new needs, you will have to satisfy them. So the fewer needs you have in life, the better. Some greetings from Ecuador. And another question from a different place. If you hadn't coached Rafa, who would you would like to coach? Any player willing to listen to me. Any player willing to give their utmost. I was very lucky as a coach because I coached not just just a very well-mannered guy. I mean, I can say that because his family, right? But he's probably one of the most courteous players. He never talked back. He was always polite. Only once in the past, when he was very young, he turned to me and said, I can do it any better. I just can't. I've been very lucky because I coached someone who listened to me, willing to listen to me and to follow my advice and willing to give his utmost, to go all the way. I mean, there are so many kids in the academy that when things go wrong, they just give in. They just throw in the towel. I wasn't used to that, so it's quite surprising to see that attitude, which is quite common today. It's very rewarding to coach someone like Rafa. It's not just winning Wimbledon or Roland Garros. I mean, anyone would like to coach Djokovic or Federer or any other top player. But above all, I like to feel useful as a coach. I like to be respected, of course, because people should respect their elders and those who train them and teach them. I mean, there are so many brats sometimes that you see players who rather abuse their coaches. I wouldn't like that at all. I would have loved to coach a well-mannered player, a committed player, a hard-working player. Well, Rafael is like an impeccable guy, so well-mannered, so polite, so nice, the kind of friend all mothers want for their children. He's always been very polite and very kind, and I don't believe anyone could disagree with that, anyone who worked with him. I have attended some matches where I felt some cringing sensation, when I felt some cringe listening to what players said to their coaches. We have now a very interesting question. Sometimes in life, when we have to speak with the enemy or the competition, we find it very hard. Is it common to talk with your opponent before a match or not, Federer or whoever? An opponent is not an enemy. An adversary is not an enemy because they do what I do. We do the same thing. Those people are not enemies. And that's not the right approach, to see them as enemies. Respecting your rivals is essential, in my opinion. If you respect your opponent, what's more, if you admire your opponent, so much the better, because you can learn from them. And of course, you can talk to them, even if you're going to fight against them. Even if you're pursuing the same goal, you may not share the same view, but that's okay. We're going to fight until the end, but once the match is over, it's over. I never thought our opponents were our enemies. Never, ever. As you know, I support Barcelona, and of course, everyone has flaws. I like Barcelona, but I'm not against Real Madrid. They fight for the same thing. Sometimes one of them wins, another one loses, or vice versa. But I don't hate Real Madrid, although I'm a staunch supporter of Barcelona. They may win, I may not like it, but that's all. I like Federer. I like to see him win, provided Rafa doesn't lose. I admire our rivals. And it's not the right approach. It's the wrong approach in life, not respecting your rivals and treating them as enemies. It's not the right thing to do. Yes, of course, I agree. More questions or more greetings from Edinburgh, Tenerife, the Canaries. I have a question for you. All of us feel very frustrated during the lockdown. We find it very hard to keep on going. What would you tell me to motivate me to have a better day tomorrow? How would you apply everything you've told us to this situation? How should I face the day tomorrow morning? Well, I would, it's a very simple thing. You choose how to see life. It's your choice. The way you look at life is the way life looks at you. Rose-tinted glasses or a different color glass. It's up to you to choose the color. In the past, when we traveled, I went to the airport, and after going through the gate, well, I had to... you would observe people and see many different kinds of people, and you would see someone and say, well, this guy never had a good time. And then I would find someone else doing exactly the same with the right attitude, with a smile on their face, joking. You choose. It's your choice. You choose in life how to see the world and what attitude to have. So let's do our best. Let's try to do our best every day. And I'm going to quote Tagore. If you cry because you can't see the sun, you won't be able to see the stars. I mean, at the end of the day, it's always possible to find or to see, a silver lining, a glimpse of happiness, some half motivation leading you to do something new. I mean, it's not that bad. This lockdown, I remember, before a final match in Roland Garros, Wimbledon, the night before, I would say to myself, it would be awful to lose. It would be a disaster to lose this final match. But the reality, and sometimes we did lose. Wimbledon, not Roland Garros. It was never as bad as I had imagined. I would say, okay, we lost. We'll win the next one. During the first 2 weeks of lockdown, well, what are we going to do? We ask ourselves. We're going to spend a lot of time at home. So we organize different activities with the family, some conversations. We watched some documentaries, some TV shows. I read some new books. The worst part of this, as I said before, it's not the lockdown that concerns me. It's what comes later, that uncertainty of the future. That could perhaps concern me a bit. What comes after the lockdown? A lot of uncertainty. Toni, we're running out of time, and I have another question for you. When will Rafa return to the courts in Wimbledon? Well, I'm sure that we'll be able to play Roland Garros. The country's politicians, of course, need to reactivate the economy. It would be impossible to remain in lockdown forever. So we will play Roland Garros. They've stated that they want to open. And the French have also said that they will be holding the Tour de France. 2 very important events. Of course, events organized by private parties are a different story, of course. They will lose a lot of money if they have games with empty stadiums. But of course, we need to reactivate the economy all over the place. And every sector will make a special effort to reactivate their activities or their business. I trust that Roland Garros will be held. I don't know about the US Open, because perhaps the situation in the US is different. Started later, perhaps they'll come out of the lockdown a bit later too. So it's going to be more difficult in the US. But Roland Garros is 3 months down the road, so there's plenty of time to organize it. Hopefully, Rafa will play it and win it. I'm sure he will. We've received so many comments, and it's quite impressive to see the reaction of people in the face of your philosophy, your positive attitude. I'll be sending you the comments we've received. They're quite interesting. Many people have been greatly surprised. It's been very interesting to listen to what you had to say about Rafa and about your experience and your philosophy. So hopefully we'll be able to meet very soon in Mallorca and the Balearic Islands, preferably. Yes, of course, tourism is very important for our economy, so we need you. We need you to travel to the islands. So as I said before, 2,000 people were following your presentation. We heard that it'll be possible to travel as of the 1st of July. All of you should travel to the Balearic Islands. The beaches there are incredible, the food, the people. So I agree with you. I'll be traveling to those islands as soon as I can. So thank you very much, Toni. The reaction, the feedback from people was quite striking, spectacular. So we'll keep in contact. I wish you the best. And I hope to see you soon, face to face. Hopefully, everything will go well and Banco Santander will continue to grow. I'll be inviting you to join me to meet my customers to discuss investments, because your attitude is very positive and very good. So thank you very much, Toni.